Member Scott Simpson.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. It's a pleasure as Chairman of the Justice and Electoral Select Committee to rise in support of the second reading of the Electoral Amendment Bill in the name of the Minister of Justice, the Honourable Judith Collins. Sir, other speakers have already indicated that the Select Committee has worked diligently and carefully and thoroughly through the Select Committee process and hearings on the bill, and a very high level of consensus was achieved. In fact, unanimity was achieved in terms of the recommendations of the committee on this bill. Sir, I'm surprised to hear the Labor Party Justice spokesperson indicate that they are going to move some amendments, because even though he is the Justice spokesman, he does not sit permanently on the committee, and as best as I can recall, was not privy or party to most of the discussions, if any, that took place in Select Committee. And so it comes as a surprise to me, sir, to find that now the Labor Party are moving down a different pathway after the very good work held in committee under consideration. Sir, there were 49 submissions. We heard 16 oral submissions, and there was a very good level of considered, intelligent and articulate debate around the table. I particularly want to thank those that came to submit to us orally, because they made some very good points. A number of the changes that we made as Select Committee were as a direct result of submissions made. And I, sir, think that this is an example of how the Select Committee process works effectively to provide improvements to legislation and create good legislation on the way through. There are just a couple of points that I particularly want to focus on. One was the decision of the committee to recommend the removal of clauses 35 and 36, and that was those were the clauses that related to streamers, ribbons and rosettes and the wearing thereof on election days. Now, sir, I think all around the committee we were of the opinion that the fine and long-held tradition in New Zealand has been that you do not campaign on election day. And I suspect that what the committee was seeking to achieve in recommending that a further review of election day activities be looked at in the future was that we want to preserve that sense of tradition about not campaigning on election day, but we want to also make sure that there is a practical ability to implement any changes that would protect that tradition and history of not campaigning on election day. The wearing of streamers and showing of ribbons and rosettes and what have you is actually quite a long-held convention in our election process, and we decided to recommend that the status quo exist for the meantime, but pending a review of election day activities. So the previous speaker mentioned our decision to push back on the Commission's enthusiasm for extending the role of those easy vote cards. We were very much of the view, and heard submissions, that in fact, whilst administratively easy for the Commission, there was actually a very real risk of lowering the threshold to voter fraud or potential voter fraud from extending the rollout of the use of those cards. It was possible, Mr Speaker, for someone just to turn up, front up, hand over one of those cards, not identify themselves, and then be issued with a voting paper. And we felt as a committee that that was one step too far. And we felt very strongly, and it was, I have to thank the member from New Zealand First, Dennis O'Rourke, who instigated a suggestion that in fact there be a requirement for verbal identification of voters. And sir, it probably comes as a surprise to most New Zealanders that that is not already the case. And so we've recommended that there should be a verbal positive identification of voters before a voting paper is issued, and I, sir, think that is a very good step. I want to counsel the Labor spokesman for Justice against seeing shadows where there are none. Because I suspect, listening to the tone and tenure of his speech, that in fact that's exactly what he is doing. This committee worked very hard, very long and very diligently on coming to an agreed position on the recommendations for this bill, and it now strikes me as a shame that, as I say, shadows are being seen when there are none and when a good level of consensus has been achieved in the Select Committee process. Sir, I am very pleased to commend this bill to the House in its second reading form as amended with suggestions from the hard-working Justice and Electoral Committee.
I call the Honourable Mary Ann